So if everybody's ready for a little more about auditing, I'll try to describe to you what it was like when we had our quite recent audit of Horizon 2020 projects this last winter. We also, these days, we are about to have another audit by the EU, which is actually for an FP7 project. But that audit is still ongoing. They haven't had the on-site audit yet. So I won't tell you anything about that, and it's also FP7, not Horizon 2020. So what I'm about to tell you about here is what happened this last winter when we had an audit of 3 projects in Horizon 2020. So a few words about what the subject of the audit was, who the auditors were. I'll also tell you who they might be if they were not the ones that came to us. What was the overall procedure? And I'll explain to you that it depends on what program within Horizon 2020, what kind of audit you will experience. What happened before they came to us and while they were at our premises, and then just a wrap-up. So the subject of this audit was one, research and innovation action, which is coordinated by our university at the medical faculty. One, innovation action, where our university is a partner. And one, Marie Skłodowska-Curie ITN action, where again our university is a partner. The auditors that did this audit were employed in the European Commission. They were, and they are employed in what is now called the Common Audit Service, which again is part of something larger called the Common Support Center. And all of that is part of DG RTD, which manages most of Horizon 2020. Similar audits, we often call them level 2 audits, or the term used by Francesca, may also be done by independent auditors hired by the Commission. They may also be done by the European Court of Auditors. If something bad happens or something suspicious happens, there might be an audit by Olaf. I've never experienced that, and I hope I won't, the European Anti-Fraud Office. But the audit which is about to happen is by the European Court of Auditors. And we also experienced last year that we got an email from the European Court of Auditors. They wanted to audit a partner in a project that we're coordinating, an East African partner, and they were having difficulty getting in touch or getting feedback from them. So they asked us to help them. So we have seen now that the European Court of Auditors appears to be more active in this kind of audit of individual projects. I used to believe a few years ago that that was not something they did, that they were more looking at the European budget and the agricultural funding and regional funds and stuff like that, but we've seen several examples now in Horizon 2020. So what happened briefly is, I'll just briefly summarize, we received a letter from the Commission informing us that they had selected us for an audit of these 3 projects. And of course, you have to reply that we received the letter and so on. They did an on-site audit for a full working week. Before that, we were asked to provide quite a bit of information, and they received the remaining information on site. They will write a draft audit report and give us a chance to comment, and then they'll submit the final report. So, as I said, it depends on the program, the kind of project, what kind of audit you will have. 2 of the projects here were either research and innovation action or innovation action, where the principle generally is reimbursement of actual costs. then it makes sense to have a financial audit because you have to prove that the costs that you're asking the Commission to fund were actual costs. But for marine sclerotic reactions, which is funded based on unit costs, that doesn't really make sense. What makes sense is the units, which is the trigger of the funding. Were they really done or performed, or did they happen? So that means that the audit that we received for the marine MSCA is easier to pronounce, ITN, was quite different. But it was also interesting to observe that when we first got the letter, and then we established contact, and there were emails going back and forth, and one of the first emails after we established contact from the auditors contained the first instructions on what they wanted from us. And there was absolutely no indication in that email that this one MSCA ITN project would be different. So our financial officer, who was in charge of that project, started preparing for the financial audit, which was described in the email like for the others. And then I saw the email, and I was prepared for this because of previous knowledge and information, and so I double-checked, and I sort of managed to stop her from wasting a lot of time doing things that would not make sense. And then I asked my colleague, another financial advisor, who doesn't work on European projects anymore. He used to a few years ago, but he's a statutory auditor, so he sort of is our audit advisor for all audits. And I asked him to double check with the auditors, are you sure that they wanted a financial audit in this project? And we got the confirmation, no. But the information from the auditor was not clear at all on that. So that's something that we have to be very alert when you get this information, and don't just sort of bow to the auditor and expect that everything they say and do is right and perfect and complete. You have to always be critical and double check things as a beneficiary as well. But anyway, we managed to stop wasting time on that and took it from there. So I'll show you a little bit more what kind of information they are looking for in those projects in a later slide here. We received a number of documents. One was a 13-page questionnaire, which was called Internal Control Questionnaire. 13 pages, 79 questions. Please, complete and return. And I'm not going to show you the 79 questions. I'll give you an exercise to remember. Sorry. I'll try to summarize them here. The groups of questions were general information about the organization, the main legal references for the organization, key figures about our organization, information about our accounting system, about our time recording system, our method of calculating productive hours, and method of calculating hourly rates, and our internal control testing. Actually, that one, the last one, that was just 79 questions. Yeah, so yeah, that was not the whole thing. 79 questions was at the end as a sub-table called internal control testing. So as you can see, there's a lot of information here that you would not be asked for when you have a CFS audit. This goes a lot deeper into your organization and how your organization operates and the nature of your organization. And all kinds of questions about who is responsible for what, who is authorized to do what, how are your approval procedures, and so on and so on. And in the internal control testing questionnaire with the 79 questions, here the topics were information about the auditor who produces the CFS and their relationship to us, i.e. the independence question. 10 questions about our accounting system, then a question about the financial statements that we produce, who are involved, what are their responsibilities, and what are they authorized to do. So not information about what's in the financial statement, but how do we produce it, and who is involved, and what are they authorized to do. Questions about what are our written procedures to avoid conflict of interest in general in the university. 15 questions about our procurement procedures. Then about time records, and questions for each of the cost categories in the financial statement. So there was one group of questions about personnel costs and so on and so on. That was the 13-page questionnaire. Then there was another questionnaire which got closer to the project and more project-specific questions. But also some of them were of a fairly general nature. 18 questions, which was under the heading General Information about the beneficiary, but not entirely overlapping the other one. Questions about our university's receipt and distribution of EU funding, and supporting documents for each of the cost categories. And in this questionnaire, you find sort of just one question saying we have to provide underlying documents for travel, for instance. That leads to like tens or a lot of documents depending on the number of transactions, basically, for each project. Just behind that one question, that leads to maybe 100 accounting documents, just to give you an indication of the scale of information provided. Now we'll look at the RIA and EA versus MSCA audits. The RIA and EA, that's where you have the financial audit. They provide an Excel template with spreadsheets for each cost category in the financial statement, as well as the overall financial statement. Lots of columns to be completed. You also, for instance, for personnel costs, they don't ask for a transaction level report. They ask for the number of hours and the cost per persons. But for all the other cost categories, they ask for individual transactions listed for travel and equipment and consumables and so on. For the MSCA, I told you about the potential confusion in the beginning. They ask for a little bit of financial information, but just a little. And first of all, they want to confirm that the researcher allowances, living allowance, mobility allowance, family allowance, if applicable, that they have been fully paid to the researcher. I mean, including taxes and social costs. And in our case, the additional component of this is that since we are not euro-based, we also have to confirm that this requirement has been fulfilled when we measure it at the exchange rate that is applicable to each reporting period. So for those of you who are in non-euro countries and you get this kind of project, you need, first of all, procedures to deal with that in the implementation stage of the project, because you have to start payments of these allowances based on an assumption of a euro versus your currency rate, and then you have to check at the end, after what they've been paid, when we convert that back into euros at the exchange rate for the period, have we fulfilled this requirement? And that's also what the auditors will look for. Frequently what we do is there will be a small additional payment of allowances at the end for the researcher because of this exchange rate thing. But that's very straightforward, no problem, as long as now this is not the audit, but since we're on the subject, you have to declare to the Commission with a financial statement that, okay, we'll pay it next time or before the thing ends. So that is one of the financial things that they're looking for, the auditor, this requirement. And they also look for double EU funding. Was any of the cost items that were supposed to be funded here were they funded by another EU program? That's what they will look for also. And they want to have confirmation that this researcher, now we're talking about the ITMs and the IFs, probably, there's this requirement that they have to work exclusively for the project. And they try to find any signs that they were not, basically. So those are the subjects that you might argue have a financial ramification in one way or another. But that's not really the main focus of an audit for an MSCA. Because then we got to what has to do with the researcher, and sort of the purpose of the project is the researcher, and the development of the career for the researcher. So first of all, they want to double check that this, in our case, it was 2 PhDs. They wanted to have evidence that they were eligible for the MSCA project. In terms of academic credentials, but also the mobility rules. And then there's a lot of questions about, has our university fulfilled its obligations to the researcher? Lots of different topics there. Does our university comply with the European Charter for Researchers, the Code of Conduct for Recruitment of Researchers? Were the vacancies announced where they should, i.e. at least in your access? What was the recruitment procedure? Was there any conflict of interest during the recruitment procedure? And lots of questions about the working conditions for the researcher. The contents of the employment contract, because in the grant agreement in Article 32.1, there's quite a bit of information which we as an employer need to provide in a contract with the researcher. In our case, we have solved that by creating a supplemental contract to the normal employment contract. So we point to that. We call it a researcher agreement, which is a separate contract that is signed in addition to the employment contract. And they will look through that researcher agreement in our case and double check that we have all the things there, if it's not in the employment contract, that is mentioned in Article 32.1. And then there are also there's also other information that we are supposed to provide to the researcher, and they will look and double check that we actually did. And we have to prove that the researcher was informed about these things. So before the on-site audit, we returned the questionnaires and some data from the accounts for the financial aspects, but not, I'd say, a selection of financial data. So we provide sample timesheets, extracts from the accounts, and sample employment contracts before they arrived on site. When they were on site, they were there for a whole working week. Much of that time, they were just working on their own. But of course, we had startup meeting and meeting at the end, and in between, they had meetings of various kinds with various people, including members from our financial team. But they also wanted to have personal interviews with absolutely every researcher that had been involved in any of the projects. So that was not an option, and it was not selective. It was absolutely everybody. And I wanted to meet the researchers and talk to them face to face, and have an open conversation with the questions they wanted to ask. Also, they were shown the financial systems on screen, and they were shown how transactions flow through the system and how you can get a printout from the payroll system. They were given printouts from the payroll system for absolutely all the personnel for the projects, but they also want to see how we create the printout so that they could trust the printout. So they were taking to a system administrator for the payroll system so they could show them how this happens. And of course, then in addition to that, they were provided, I believe, fairly close to full coverage for most of the cost, all the accounting documents. on site. Yeah, so that's a summary of what happened. In a previous audit a few years back, what happened, in that case, it was FP7 and it was independent company working on contract with the commission. We had prepared like these what do you call it? The folders, yeah, complete folders like that with stacked with, full with printouts with paper documents. And they have forgotten one of them when they were on site. And they went back home and they hadn't looked at it at all. And then we had to produce newer copies electronically to send them by email afterwards. And that was a really a big time. It took a lot of time and a major source of frustration. So make sure that they actually look at everything when they're there, before you let them go home again, basically. Okay, so that was a summary of what happened during the while they were on site. And briefly afterwards, what happened is they write the draft report. They ask us to comment. We commented on one thing which was like a minor error, actually, and they accepted that. And they provide the final report. And several months later, we get the confirmation that the conclusion of the audit is final and the matter is closed. But that takes quite a few months, generally. So just don't be stressed by the fact that you don't get the answer. Just sit back and concentrate on other things and you will get the answer. Yeah. So basically, what I would advise is to, as soon as you get the notice about the audit, inform people internally and make sure people are available. They're not supposed to be with them the whole week, but be available at least to meet at some point. And I would say that most of our work happens before the on-site audit, because you have to prepare everything before they're there. Some of it you have to send to them before they come, but whatever they get on site, you have to prepare it before they get there. And once they get to you, it doesn't take so much of your time. Our financial officers who were in charge of these projects, they were part of this startup meeting, and they had one meeting per project of a couple of hours. That was it. So now you're looking forward to your first audit? Yeah? This is exciting, right? Any questions? Yeah?
We had an audit, but it wasn't FP7 or H2020 project, it was a practice project. But the auditor sent out 2 of our projects, and because we were the coordinators, they were checking all the documents, ours and from all the beneficiaries.
Mm-hmm.
And we have given them, I think, around 20-25 folders, and they rather poorly estimated the time needed for the on-site audit. They were not able to do it in, I think, 5 days, working days, so we had to scan all the copies, I think, from 4 or 5
to 25?
to send them. So this is the story that you had with one folder. You had a lot more.
Yeah. Well, I won't say out loud what the words fly out of the room then. It's so again, it's another reminder that actually, as a beneficiary, you need to be alert also, and remember that auditors are also humans, and humans can make mistakes. So.
I think that they were not aware how many of the documents they have to check, even though they had the financial statements.
Yeah.
And they knew how many items there were to check, but they didn't expect so many papers to check.
But your reply is, you asked for it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Sorry.
How do you send the electronic data? By email, usually the next has some limitations. How do you assure that it doesn't go?
The data that we sent them before on site,
Yes.
It was basically by email, because in actually the invitation letter, they said explicitly that there was no way to provide this through the participant portal. The participant portal doesn't support that functionality as of today, anyway. It might come in the future, because they're continuously developing the participant portal, but at that time it had to be through email. So, I mean, in these GDRP, no, DPRD days, you might question that, whether email, I mean, a lot of people say that Gmail is in no way secure. You might try to encrypt your data emails, but I'm not sure exactly how secure it is. So, but that's the way it happened. It was by email. Yeah. We'll use Dropbox next time, right?
We had one project that was more sensitive, and we could not use any company that was related to the United States or Russia. So we had to send it by Portuguese mail service and ensure that it was not.
Okay.
In other countries that are not European Union. So,
Yeah.
So that was sensitive.
Yeah. I wonder if courier is considered secure. If you send it by like DHL or something like that. Okay, any other questions? 5-minute break before the exercise. And also, yes, sorry. Now we're all going to put out our big smiles and have a group picture outside. Okay, thank you. And thanks to Sunset.